What's up, everybody? Andor Season 2 drops in just a couple days here, and I've got a full recap of everything you need to know before watching Season 2. Let's dive in. I'm going to go episode by episode for Season 1 of the show, and then afterwards I'm going to cover a couple things very briefly, like Mon Mothma and her place in Star Wars Rebels and how it relates to this show, as well as Saw Gerrera and a few other things, but first, let's get into Season 1. The first episode of the show opens with the scene that I still don't quite understand being in the show, Cassian looking for his sister. Now, they could pick up this storyline in Season 2 and resolve this issue, but for now, it's one of my few genuine complaints I have with Season 1. Like, it's followed by the flashback that's spread over the first couple of episodes here. I think it's just the first 3 episodes where he and his sister and their community on Kenari find the Separatist ship. But that's all we get from this side of the story in Season 1, and it's always been a mind-boggling decision to me. But anyway, we meet Serial Karn after that, and he's such a twat, and I can't blame him that much though, because working at Primor has to be torturous as they have to avoid the Imperial overlords by being like them and spewing lies. Then back on Ferrix, we meet the people Cassian cares about, or maybe I should say the people he needs to keep himself on his feet. That's B2EMO, Brasso, and Bix, and a lot of B's in there, as Bix is the key one to me, not just because it's Adria Jorna, but because she's the connection to Luthen. Also, you get the sense from his interactions with Brasso to Biggs to the shipyard guy who I'm blanking on his name right now, but you get the sense that he's a well-liked person in his community. It's just, he's also a walking headache for a lot of them, which that's just love, and it sets the rest of the season up really well, in my opinion. That brings us to episode 2, where Bix sees a Primor bounty on Cassian and the start of the end for Ferrix begins. She just had to get with the douche Tim she runs her shop with, but as we know, that only lasts so long because Karma's a bitch. We also meet Marva here in episode 2, one of my favorite characters in the entire show. But with Primor hot on his tail, Cassian is in fight or flight mode as the great, the powerful, the one, the only Stellan Skarsgård arrives on Ferrix, introducing his character, another one of my favorites from the show, Luthen Rael. Then, even though I despise Serial more than anything in this show, the character Serial Karn, we do get a damn good scene with him as he tries to give his hype speech to the Primor team on their way to arrest Andor. It's quite possibly the only scene of his that I enjoyed in the show, and the hyperspace shot and design of this Primor ship here are both damn good examples of the brilliance of those who work behind the scenes at ILM. Moving on to episode 3, we jump into the final moments before chaos as everybody arrives on Ferrix. However, Gilroy also finishes the flashback as we see a younger Marva and a younger Cassian meet each other on that crashed Separatist ship, with the Republic closing in as Primor closes in on him in the present. But he meets with Luthen first, and he's more interested in getting Cassian on his side, or at the very least figuring out if that's a possibility and what his true intentions are, rather than the box itself that he's buying. I love the fat and satisfied line from Cassian here too. It's one of the best descriptions of the Empire in all of Star Wars, and this continues. This show, the Empire in this show, except for the finale, continues to be my favorite portrayal of the Empire since Empire Strikes Back. Then everything goes to hell as Primor crashes their party, forcing them to leave the box behind. Bix loses Tim, and that's only the beginning of her torture in the show, while Luthen and Cassian put the fear of God in Serial and make their escape via speeder. The end of this episode is really cool though, and it makes so that the flashback being so spread out is actually kind of brilliant, as we see young Cassian joining his first and then older Cassian joining his second rebellion at the same time. In fact, that's kind of how a lot of this show went for me. It wasn't until I watched it a second time, and now a third time here, where I appreciated it even more and binged it, that I truly appreciated what Tony Gilroy crafted. Then jumping to episode 4, the start of the second arc in season 1, we pick up with Luthen and Cassian on the way to Aldhani with Luthen's recruiting pitch. It also brings the Empire into the picture after their eventful escape from Ferrix. Also, quick side note, Gilroy gives a nod to the wider galaxy here with the Ryloth reference, as we know it was one of the more resistant planets thanks to Cham Syndulla and his freedom fighters. Back to the show though, our new duo arrive on Aldhani where we meet Vel, Skeen, Terriman, Nemec, and Cinta Luthen's crew. Luthen doesn't stay there himself though, because he's got to swap his drip out for his Coruscant attire and head back to his base of operations. Once we're there, Genevieve O'Reilly returns as Mon Mothma with two powerful figures in the rebellion meeting with each other here in the show. In fact, a lot of this episode is actually showing these rebels on their heels as Vel gets Cassian dropped on her, which pisses their Imperial spy off, Gorn, and then Mon Mothma, her husband, invites all of her foes in the Senate, including Palpatine's girl, Sly Moore, to his birthday. On top of that, we got some beef in the ISB as Dedra wants in on the pursuit of Andor and the rebellion, but her ambition doesn't necessarily get her in trouble right here, but it does put the spotlight on her in this scene. Major Partagas wants her to focus on her own sectors, so he's disappointed with her in the moment, but he's happy overall with the work she's doing. That takes us into episode 5 where Cereal Karn eats his cereal, but more importantly, we get some backstory for Ebon Moss Baccarat's Skeen. He and Cassian, they're a lot more alike than they probably thought they were, and Skeen also gives them the rundown on the rest of the team. But to be honest, this is probably my least favorite episode of the season because it's just a ton of planning, which, and this is just for me, the payoff is worth it in episode 6. They're ironing out their heist plan, getting their Imperial impressions down, and we do see the Empire arrive on Ferrix too, so I guess something did happen. We do also get a really cool TIE fighter sequence here where he kind of just does a show of force running through the valley, and another display of ILM's incredible work, and to be fair, Gilroy does give us some great dialogue in this episode too. It's just, well, let's be honest, it's a bit boring, and this gets thrown around too much, but this was a genuine filler episode for Season 1. However, I did like seeing Luthen's paranoia towards the end of the episode here because his crew are at each other's throats over on Aldhani. He was also real reckless getting Andor off of Ferrix and over to Aldhani, so he knows tomorrow is simply the start, not the end, especially for him. With that episode out of the way, it's back to the goods as we move on to episode 6 here, the heist episode. The guys are impersonating Imperial troops, going in through the front door, while Vel and Cinta scale the dam and make their own entrance to set up the heist. They take this pudgeball Imperial officer and his family hostage and then use the skeleton crew that's left down in the vault to move all the credits for them. This part was very personal for Cinta because her family was wiped out by stormtroopers, so she's a tad bit trigger happy here. Then, just as they're running out of time down in the vault, the Eye of Aldhani begins. But before we get to that, a firefight breaks out and Gorn is one of the first casualties, followed by Terramin, and that one is actually on Skeen because he selfishly pulled back after laying down like a second of cover fire. So that leaves Skeen, Cassian, Vel, and Nemec on the ship with Cinta escaping by her own means in an Imperial officer's uniform. But Nemec takes a big hit during their escape, and so, much like K2SO does in Rogue One, he goes out giving Cassian directions, climb. Also, the Eye of Aldhani is still, to this day, my favorite visual in all of the galaxy. Far, far away, it definitely lived up to the hype. The episode closes as they do all they can for Nemec, but with no luck. That pushes Skeen over the edge as if he needed a reason to be selfish. He doesn't, spoiler alert, and so the crew, at the end of the day, is Cassian and Vel and then Cinta on her own. At the same time, the ISB are on high alert after the heist, and Mon Mothma's speech is interrupted while Luthen celebrates. Moving on to episode 7, the robbery at Aldhani has brought Colonel Yularen out for the ISB, which those of you that have watched the Clone Wars, you know that's Anakin Skywalker's admiral that he served alongside throughout the war. I remember seeing him pop up for the first time when I was watching it as it came out, and I don't think I've ever hit the Leo meme so fast for somebody so random. But the Empire aren't the only ones scrambling after Aldhani. Mon Mothma isn't too happy with Luthen following the heist, and he's done following any rules. It's time for the rebellion to get moving in full swing in his eyes, and once again, Stellan Skarsgård is simply incredible, flipping between Luthen Rael, Rebel, and Luthen Rael, the salesman. Vel also makes her way to Coruscant after splitting from Cassian, which Luthen certainly isn't a fan of. Then we get an incredible scene from Mon Mothma at her husband's party as she reconnects with an old friend attempting to spark her rebellion. This is peak Mon right here, and Genevieve O'Reilly brings it 110%, and I think, I don't want to say this just willy-nilly, but I think it serves as proof we should get recast instead of CGI recreations of OG characters. Anyway, Cassian returns to Ferrix trying to get his people out as he stops by Marva's and then makes his way to see Biggs. but he gets the cold shoulder from Bix as she rips him apart, saying everything I said back in episode 1. He's family to them, they love him, but he's a pain in the ass, and the Empire's on his tail now too, and on theirs now too, because of him. Then as he makes his way through town, we get a flashback to the early days of the Empire when they were still using clone troopers, and it's to the night his father died. That takes us into Marva's rant of the rebellion, and funny enough, Cassian's heist inspired her to stand up and fight once again. On top of that, Dedra plays her cards and earns the full respect of Partagaz as well as the supervision over Ferrix, but that also gets the others on her back, especially Blevin, and I think we're going to see that play out a bit more in season 2 based on some stuff in the trailers. Then the episode closes as Cassian is caught on Neamos, but not for the heist, he's just targeted because he looks nervous. This was also the first appearance in the series for the KX droids, and we'll of course see our friend K2SO in season 2, but Andor is sentenced to prison for the time being. That brings us to episode 8, where Dedra takes interest in Serial's constant reports on Ferrix and Andor. She's bringing him in on the case because, like her, he's ambitious as hell. He also confirms what she seemed to kind of sense already, that Blevin is cutting corners and she's simply all in on the Empire. Then we join Andor as he arrives at his new home, the Imperial prison on Narkina 5. These Spaceballs looking goofball Imperials are rocking those boots because, to keep the prisoners in line, the floors of this entire prison are charged with electricity. Once he makes his way to his floor, we meet Andy Serkis' second character in the galaxy far, far away, Kino Loy. For those of you who don't know, the legendary actor voiced the not-so-legendary Supreme Leader Snoke in the sequel trilogy, and regardless of Snoke's story, I'm going to make fun of him, but Andy was amazing in the role. Anyway, the prisoners at Narkina 5 are unknowingly constructing the Death Star for the Empire, and I thought this was such a great way of introducing the breadcrumbs of that into Andor's life, because obviously he's building the weapon that will eventually wipe him out. Back on Ferrix, Marva isn't doing too well as Bix and Brasso try taking care of her, but to no avail as she's a stubborn old lady, which is why she's a damn good rebel. At the same time, Cinta and Vel are there too, hunting Andor, but they're running out of connections as Bix is on the Empire's list. Then Luthen pays a visit to a familiar face, Saw Gerrera. He has a working relationship with a guerrilla warrior, but there's no movement on the deal he wants here, at least not yet, but that will change in time, and that duo is one of my most anticipated parts of season 2. I think Saw will go down as, let's say, an important figure in Luthen's fate. That's just my speculation though, as it's time to dive into episode 9, where Dedra and Dr. Ghost begin Bix's torture. The Doctor is probably Palpatine's favorite guy because he's just a straight psycho, and Dedra has so much promise as a character at this point because she's a psycho too. It's a shame where her story goes. Then back on Narkina 5, Cassian has had his time to plot with the other prisoners who are sick of slaving away for the Empire, and with a new worker joining their floor, he's putting his escape plan together for the next time they get a new floor member. After that, we head back to Coruscant where Mon Mothma is fighting a pointless fight in the Senate because Palpatine has full control via intimidation. But we also get the reveal, after plenty of breadcrumbs, that her cousin is indeed Vel, and that's why Luthen is so worried about her. Then we get what I consider to be the beginning of the end for Dedra being a great Imperial. She's on her way into work, and Serial has been stalking her, and she's subtly impressed by it, but she's still got a couple episodes left of being a great villain, so I'm gonna wait to complain. From there, we go back to Narkina 5 where Ulaf has put in his last shift, and unfortunately, that's the opportunity that Cassian and the others need to get out. But we also get the confirmation that the Empire did in fact wipe out an entire level, and as they said earlier in the show, oppression breeds rebellion. Moving on to episode 10, we see Kino come around to Cassian's plan after learning, well, he doesn't learn, he knew, but accepting that no one ever is getting out of prison, especially with the Empire's new protocol changes, you just get transferred until you die. That takes us into the ISB, where they plot to take out Krieger's rebel group, and this was a perfect combination of scenes to kick off this final arc. Then over on Coruscant, Mon Mothma's old friend Tay Kolma presents her with a way to fulfill her plans. He brings her Davos Skolden, a banker who can move her funds in secret, but for a cost. He wants to match their children, and she immediately denies it, but the rebel in her won't let it go away. However, this episode is titled One Way Out, so we gotta get back to Narkina 5, where Cassian puts their escape plan into action when Olaf's replacement comes to the floor. This was not only a great scene, but a great display of how Palpatine's greed stretched the Empire so thin that you have a bunch of buffoons overseeing one of the most important projects to said empire. But the best part of the whole prison break for me is Kino Loy's speech to the rest of the raft. He knows right here that he's probably not escaping, but he does what he's done best since he got there, inspires everyone else, and for once, it's inspiring them with hope instead of fear. Then going back to Coruscant, we get Luthen's meeting with his ISB mole. Just like with Cassian, he knows everything about Lonnie, and Lonnie's just trying to be a good mole. We got the legendary monologue from Stellan Skarsgård here, and this is undoubtedly the best scene in the entire show, with the icing on the cake being it takes place in the underworld of Coruscant. Episode 10 closes as we see the two lone survivors of the prison break and the swim to shore, Cassian and Melshi. For those of you that have seen Rogue One, I'd assume that's most of you here. Those two are key pieces in the rebellion in that movie, and I believe Melshi is confirmed for season 2 as well, if I remember correctly. That brings us to episode 11, the penultimate episode, where we pick up right with Cassian and Melshi, who have their escape interrupted by Imperial search ships. Melshi, he wants to give up, but Cassian won't let him after how far they've come, and with them being the lone survivors. But what Cassian doesn't know is that Marva is gone. Her stubbornness ended up costing her her life, and B2 Emu is just crushed. It sounds so silly, if you don't understand the galaxy far, far away, or if you're new to it, or anything like that, but the droids in this universe are the heart and the soul of every great tale from the world of George Lucas, and Gilroy understood that. Then the Empire is also using Bix to try and snuff out the rebellion as they present her with Anto Krieger, the rebel who Luthen wanted Saw Gerrera to meet with. She sells him out to save herself, Cassian, and kinda Luthen too, as it's all doom and gloom for our rebels in this episode. That continues as we head to Coruscant, where Mon Mothma explains her dilemma to Vel. On one hand, her daughter does love the customs of their people, but that doesn't exactly give Mon the right to sell her out to build a rebellion, and Mon knows it. Then Luthen pays a visit to Saw, who's had a change of heart as far as the Krieger mission goes, but it's too late now, not only because of the timing, but because Luthen knows that Krieger is being set up and he can't lose Saw. When he's leaving Saw's base, we got to see his ship in action, and it's one of the coolest in all of Star Wars. The penultimate episode comes to a close as Cassian makes contact with Ferrix, hoping to give Marva the relief of knowing that he's okay, only to find out that she's gone. He and Melshi part ways on Neamos, and it's eerily similar to the end of Rogue One, with Cassian on a beach watching the sunset. Alright, that brings us to the season 1 finale, and thank God, because I'm losing my voice here, as Dedra returns to Ferrix with Bix, distraught after her torture, and Willman plotting his revenge after the Empire took his father for being the middleman between Bix and Luthen, who they do still think is Krieger. Then over on Coruscant, Mon Mothma continues her diabolical work to fund her rebellion. She accuses her husband of gambling again, knowing her driver would be listening because he's an Imperial spy, and it works like a charm. She's truly a great politician. After that, Andor returns to Ferrix and is met with a warm welcome, but that's because he's also met with a swarm of terrible news. In fact, everyone is making their way to Ferrix here as Vel and Luthen arrive to join Cinta, who had been waiting for Andor since she finished the Aldani heist and got out of there. But that's not the point, as the people of Ferrix come together for Marva and her funeral and her hologram speech that almost featured the first F-bomb in Star Wars. I do think it's perfect the way it is. Fight the Empire works just as well, especially in universe, but the trucker mouth side of my brain always tells me it should have been fuck. Regardless, she inspires her people to stand against their oppressors as chaos ensues in the streets, giving Cassian cover to go get Bix out of the hotel, but she's been so traumatized by the Empire that she doesn't even want to leave. Then we get to the Dedra scene that ruined her character for me, as amidst the chaos she drops every bit of the badass she was throughout the season. Now, I get that you want to, portray the Empire as being incompetent sometimes when it really matters and full of power when they're safe and sound, but making it so that Serial saves her at gunpoint and that leads to a relationship between the two in season 2, nah. Gilroy, you missed the mark on this one big time. But I can't lie, he nailed the landing as the season comes to a close with Mon Mothma following through on selling her daughter out to build a rebellion, while Andor forces his way into Luthen's side of the rebellion for good once again as they spark the rebellion for Season 2 as the Empire constructs the Death Star. Now that we've got Season 1 covered, it's time to wrap the video up with just a few quick notes on Mon Mothma, Saw Gerrera, and director Krennic. So we see Mon Mothma appear in Star Wars Rebels Season 3 and Season 4, just in a couple of episodes in each, but in Season 2 of Andor, somewhere in episodes 7 to 9 if they follow the timeline, we're going to see her depart from the Senate. She does this after the Gorman massacre in 2 BBY, so that's where I'm getting my episode guess from because every 3 episodes of season 2 is 1 year. 1 to 3, episodes 1 to 3 is 4 BBY, episodes 4 to 6 is 3 BBY, episodes 7 to 9, 2 BBY, and episodes 10 to 12, 1 BBY. But the point is, I think her presence in this show is going to predate her appearance in Rebels. Then the same thing goes for Saw Gerrera, but I want to go back to something I mentioned briefly earlier, and that's him being tied to Luthen's fate. Now, I don't think he'll sell him out, but Saw is Mr. Greater Good, and so I think we're 100% going to learn that Saw gave Luthen the same treatment that Luthen gives Krieger, and that's going to be crazy. Finally, with Ben Mendelsohn back as director Krennic, who appears in The Bad Batch Season 1 with Tarkin, and again, this is just my prediction, me speculating, but I think we'll see that combo. I don't want to call them a duo, but that combo at each other's necks in Season 2 of this show as Krennic oversees the construction of the Death Star, inflating his ego. And so that's going to do it for my Andor Season 1 recap and Season 2 preview. Like I said, just quick notes on those 3 that were sitting in my mind as I did my rewatch of the show, but I want to know what you guys want to see from Andor Season 2, so let me know down in the comments below. Subscribe so that you don't miss out on any of my breakdowns for Season 2, and make sure you have a great day.